Hello and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers podcast. My name is Chris Armstrong, and today I am joined by three beautiful humans. First up, David Maynard.
Hello.
Russell Craxford.
Hi there.
And the one and only Beth Marshall.
Hello, hello.
So today we are going to be talking about flow. And we'll get into more what we mean about that in a minute. But before then, we've got a lovely, beautifully read sponsor message by Beth.
I don't think a Grimbarian accent has ever been described as beautifully read, but here goes. Saffron QA continue to be our sponsor, and they are also here to support the testing community. Therefore, should any of our listeners be in the market for a new job in testing or hiring talent for your team, please reach out to Ben. He can be contacted via email at ben@saffronqa.co.uk.
Awesome, thank you, Beth. And thank you to Ben for continuing to sponsor us. Good lad. Now, banter. And today's banter is the beautiful Russell Craxford. There's a lot of beauty tonight, friends.
We're all beautiful. We are indeed. Okay, beautiful. That triggers an idea. I remember a song called Beautiful, or something along those lines. So let's go down that road. So if you think, what is the sort of music that makes you want to sing along? So think of the song, type of song. What sort of triggers you to start singing out loud, be it in the shower, in the car, or at your desk in the office with everyone staring at you?
I used to have a joke about this with my friend Agni, who's been on the podcast before, where you would try really hard to sing along to Sia's Chandelier. I don't have the range, but I would belt it out, and sometimes I'd forget my windows were down. I found it a bit awkward in traffic. It was worth a go, and we kind of used to just sort of laugh whenever it came on. We go, oh, did you hear it today? See, awesome times.
My cue would be any cue, because I'm a terrible singer, but I love to give things a go. I'm actually starting a choir, joining a work-based choir tomorrow. So I'm going to go along and do my best, shall we say. What usually starts me off is lyrics. So if someone happens to either mistakenly or on purpose say a song lyric, I kind of feel the need to finish it, usually in song form. You know, a bit like Eric Cartman did. If he heard the first line to I'm Sailing Away, he had to read the whole thing. Yeah, I'm a little bit annoying like that. So yeah, that usually starts me off. I don't need much of an excuse.
Chris, now don't start giving us one-liners from music, because I know what you like.
Oh, we have been there before. For me, what gets me going, probably some of the classic 80s tracks. Anything that I know the words to probably would get me trying to sing. But actually, that never stopped me before. Even if I get the words wrong, I will just try my best. But interestingly, Beautiful was by Christina Aguilera, and I sang it to my daughter as I was pushing her out of the delivery room. So unfortunately, she did have one of her first memories, or probably not memory, nightmare, was me singing to her out of tune a song.
It wasn't a nightmare, that was literally just a memory, wasn't it?
Yeah. What about you, Russell?
I'm a bit like you, David, and some of the classics will get me singing along to it, sort of thing, a bit of rock. There's ultimately one which I will always try and sing along to, which is probably Faithless Insomnia. I will try and do the kind of the lyrics to it. I'm terrible and I get them wrong. You reminded me of another song that I got wrong as a kid. Achy Breaky Heart. Eggy Bready Heart. My very Yorkshire version of it. It still made sense to me. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, on to tonight's topic, perhaps.
Tell us what you think about flow.
Oh, okay. So when people say flow to me, the image that I think of is in the film Social Network, where a young Mark Zuckerberg and et al. Are in their college dorm or wherever, and they have their headphones on and they're staring at their screens and they're coding for hours and hours and hours, and under no circumstances is anyone allowed to interrupt those people. That's what I think of when I hear the concept flow. But I think the reality is we've probably all had those inadvertent moments. Time has just gone really quickly. We seem to almost that system 2 brain that we have that is not really conscious thought is just taking over. We're just in the flow of what we're doing and things seem to just make sense. And it's maybe feels aspirational a lot of the time. It feels like something that we're trying very hard to achieve. But I'm curious to know any kind of strategies that you guys have for encouraging flow. When is a good time to to try and aim to be in flow, and maybe some experiences you've had with when your flow's been interrupted. How do you maximize, as a leader, how do you maximize the amount of flow that the people that you kind of work with get in their day-to-day lives at work? David?
Well, for me at the moment, flow is difficult to get because of the amount of meetings that I have. I don't have enough time to actually get into that flow state, or give myself enough time in order to get into that. And often I'm, even at times when I potentially can have, I'm collaborating with other people. So therefore it's not as easy to sort of get into that flow state. It'd be interesting to know, actually, can you get into a flow state when you're working with other people? You probably can do if you're all on the same page and in the same direction. So it'd be interesting to know if anyone's got examples of that. In terms of how do I get into it, I think that the best way is to just believe that you can do it and get yourself in that mindset that it feels comfortable. It's just making sure that you don't have those interruptions and things. I do believe that when I do try and get into that flow state, I do the Pomodoro Technique. And there are certain apps and stuff that you can download on your phone or on the laptop, which gives you that sort of chance of 20 minutes with a 5-minute break, and then another 20 minutes and then a 10-minute break. And it really does work, especially if you're trying or have got out of the routine of the flow state, because it gives you the chance to realize that you can actually concentrate for 20 minutes and it disappear very quickly. And it's the same with anything, that the benefit of flow state is the fact that you don't realize quite how much time you've actually spent on things, that actually you can achieve a lot in a very short space of time.
It's interesting. You talked about the Pomodoro Technique, and when we were talking about the idea of flow before we started recording, I boldly and brashly said, Barbara Oakley, focus and diffuse mode. And then I had to sort of try and remember exactly what those things meant. I thought I might just quickly look it up. So Barbara Oakley wrote a book with Terrence Sejnowski, whose name I would have pronounced wrong, called How to Learn How to Succeed in School Without Spending All Your Time Studying. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? But she defines focus mode as when you're using focus mode, it means that you're paying attention. For example, you might be trying to figure out a maths problem or listening to your teacher, or you might be focusing on playing a video game or putting together a puzzle, learning words from a different language. When you're focusing, you're putting specific parts of your brain to work. Which parts are working depends on what you're doing. For example, when you're doing a multiplication problem, focusing will use different parts of your brain than when you're speaking. When you're trying to learn something new, you must first focus intently on it in order to turn on those parts of your brain. I think that's some of what we've been talking about with the flow, getting back into it and to get the learning process started. And then the flip is the diffuse mode. And so if that's focus mode, what's diffuse mode? And diffuse mode is when you put your mind into a relaxed and free state. You're thinking about nothing in particular. You're in diffuse mode when you're daydreaming or doodling just for fun. If your teacher tells you to concentrate, you probably have slipped into diffuse mode. When you're in diffuse mode, you're gently using other parts of the brain that are used mostly differently from those that you use when you're focusing. A diffuse mode helps you make imaginative connections between ideas, and creativity often pops up out of using the diffuse mode. And it turns out that your brain has to go back and forth between the two modes in order to learn effectively. And that's kind of the point. So it's a long and dragged out way, but I figured it's quite important. We talk about flow and the value of it, but getting back into it, but also the value of not fully focusing hard on just one thing, because your brain's like a muscle, right? So you have to use different parts of it all the time. Otherwise, that muscle's going to flop and not be well utilized.
Need to go to the brain gym, I think.
There was brain training game on the Nintendo DS that I had.
There was, yeah. I remember there was quite a fashion for brain training things. It's interesting, obviously, we talk about flow quite a lot. I guess the other term for it is the zone. Don't know what I've found at times. I kind of get into that zone. The world around you just melts away. It's gone. It's like you're not conscious of it. You're not consciously ignoring it, but you just, little things just don't seem to be there. It's obviously when someone comes around and disturbs it, someone asks you a question, someone wanders into your room, or a dog comes and starts barking at you crazily. It gets very frustrating where that flow gets disrupted abruptly, I think is the thing. And it can be quite sort of jarring to your experience, and it can completely derail your thought process, your tracks, and all the rest of it. Easily happens as well. But I found that little things don't. So if I get a ping on Slack, if I'm in the zone and I'm flowing, then it doesn't disturb me unless I was looking at Slack to start with. If I was writing a message in Slack, that was part of what I was doing, then it does disturb me. So it does depend on the context a little bit still. I know how much we love context. It is a strange state.
I was going to go back to what you were saying about Barbara. Is flow slightly different? Because she was talking about learning, and actually in the state that she was describing, you are learning new things. Whereas is flow state, and the first example that Beth came out in the networking, it's more comfortable. So they're not necessarily learning. They're in that sort of zone of, I know what I'm doing, so therefore I can just bang it out without actually consciously doing it. And I do agree that you do need to do and flip between, as you say, it's a muscle, you need to exercise it. But actually, are we talking about two different things here? So flow state is where you know what you're doing and you can just get immersed in it. And then potentially you can learn, especially if it's a topic that you are interested in, you can get absorbed into that. So it's a subtly different thing because you might have to do a little more concentration in the learning.
It's a good question. I think they're subtly different, but tightly intertwined and aligned in a lot of what they do. I think both actions probably have something that we want to do and something that we all may struggle with and find we're easily distracted at certain times. We haven't quite touched on hyperfocus yet, a little bit more deeply as well, right? I mean, I think you just did a little bit earlier when nobody's paying attention, you can't hear anything. But I think it's all to do with your brain and what's going on and how much we have control. We obviously have an intent to do certain things, but we're all also wired differently. And therefore what that looks like and how we achieve it is going to be different. It's a little bit like trying to get to sleep in some ways, because it's a lot easier for some people to get into it. It's very easy for people to get into bad habits. And sometimes you can find things just so hard to get back into it, right? And it gets a bit of a downward spiral. And I think there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn with all these things. We all have an intent and a desire, but sometimes other things outside of that intent are sort of preventing us from achieving this.
It's interesting you mentioned the word bad habits, because listening to what you're saying makes me think about the nature of habits and how so much of our day it can be divided up into kind of habitual stuff that we don't really remember doing. We might not really remember driving to work because it's such a habitual thing. But we remember driving on a new journey, or we remember something different because then our brain is kind of engaged in a different way. And maybe that's, when you're in flow state is perhaps when you're doing some of the subconscious, you're brushing your teeth. Do you remember brushing your teeth this morning? I don't. I know I did, but don't remember it. So habits and habits, I know from my boss, Alex Reynolds at Lloyd's, he's really big on habits, and he has a habit of writing in a journal or learning something for half an hour every day. And he's like 7 or 8 journals in. So this is something that he's really stuck to. It's not a kind of New Year's resolution thing. I find that quite amazing, really, because I'm not sure I could have the same commitment. But the thing he said helped is finding the time of day when you can commit to doing that and when you feel comfortable doing that. So for some people, finding a time to go into flow state might be before work. Just don't open your emails, don't do anything work related. Just find the time after you've dropped the kids off or whenever that you can focus on this thing. Or it might be later in the day if that fits in more to the way that you're kind of primed to be awake and apt to focus on things. When's the best time for you to get into flow state?
Good point, because I think it is different for different people, and that partly it's work, partly it's personality. Like I would call myself an evening person. I get more done probably in the hours of like 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock than I do in the rest of the day combined. But that's not normal for most people. Well, there's no such thing as normal, but never mind. Everyone is slightly different. I find that it's often where I get quieter calendars wherever I've worked, because a lot of people could shut off at 4, school runs and other reasons. So I've actually found that's often where I get peace, freedom, other things like that, and where I get things done and I can just focus, can I do the work that I know I need to do and know how to do it. I'm not trying to set the world on fire. I'm not asking people questions. I can just get on and get done. And I generally enter that sort of state of just churning through output. So it's kind of, that's the sort of time that works for me. But David, Chris, what about you guys?
For me, it's early morning. I get up early. I do write in a journal. I have 2 journals actually, and this is a sort of a thing that I also use in the middle of the day. Is I call it a splurge journal. So I have a general journal where I write my thoughts and feelings and things, but I also have a splurge journal. So if I wake up in the middle of the night and I have all these thoughts firing, I just open this journal and just write down what those things are. So I've now got a record of them. I probably don't refer to it again, but it's there as a record. And, I can then go back to sleep again. And I do that as well. Also, if I'm trying to enter a flow state and these things are coming to me, I will write down those things so that I can refer to them later, but I won't do them at that stage. My time, if I wanted to do work, I love coming in a bit earlier. So at 8 o'clock, again, similar to you saying, Russell, about 4 o'clock, being able to come in at 8 o'clock, I call it the golden hour for me, because I can just, it's quiet. I don't have those interruptions. I don't have those pings, and I can achieve a lot in that hour before people come in at 9. And sometimes it can, if I don't get interrupted, it can go on to 9:30, and I think, oh my God, I don't have a meeting until 10 o'clock and I'm almost there already. And I do love that extra time in the morning.
I used to think I had everything sorted and sussed, because I used to have a 1-hour commute and it was a super easy drive to Beth's point. Like, I did not have to engage my brain on that drive. It was simple. It was easy. It was very comfortable. I could balance a bit of time listening to podcasts and listening to music, and I could sort of get my brain almost like with this nice habit in the right state, so like getting to work, I could think about things, and so when I came in, I could open up my diary. I had an actual diary with dates on and stuff. I could write checklists for the day. I'd find it really easy to sort of get started on that. I'd get in quite early as well, which is always good, because a quieter time is better than a sort of crazy time at the start of the day. And then the pandemic happened and it didn't work. I didn't have all that time all of a sudden to myself. It was kind of going from the crazy into a small little box room to try and just get stuff done in an uncomfortable at the time working environment. I didn't have the tools, didn't have the space, I didn't have that thing. I did a talk at Eurostar a couple of years ago about finding a toolkit to help you survive sometimes. And one of those bits was a shelter, a place that you're home and you're comfortable and confident to work in. And a routine like that at the start of your day is something that gets you in a good mood. You feel comfortable, you're not thrown off. Lots of sort of change that throws you off is always quite jarring and quite difficult to recover from. If your work environment isn't one that you're comfortable and confident in, that's quite hard. Like, if I haven't got a pen that I like to use, if I'm in a meeting and I want to take notes, I want to have everything at my hand. So I've got a notebook just next to me here. I've got some post-it notes just in front of me here. So when I'm in a meeting now, or just need to get some things out of my head, I can just quickly like jump around and do those things. And I mean, I've got that thing called a mobile phone that I can take notes in. The problem with that thing is it's got other things that are trying to jump around for my attention. So I'm trying not to use those things. But in terms of sort of how I'm able to engage, I think at the time at which I'm able to do those things, I need to write physically with a pen. That's how things get out of my head. That's how I can get my thoughts out. If somebody said, type something up quickly, can't do it. I have to actually physically write those things out, draw things. It's a complete mess. No one's ever going to read those notes, David, to your point. It's out my head, and suddenly I can actually, like, I freed up those sort of pressing little things. You know, when you're speaking to a child and they're desperate to get something in, but you've got to finish your stuff, and they go, and you give them enough time to speak then, and they get so cross because they've forgotten, because they were so angry that they weren't being listened to. It feels like that sort of happens in my head a little bit. If I can just write something down, it's out my head, it's down, and I can now process and move forwards. But without that thing, if I've got those sorts of things shouting in my head, I can't process and move on to something that's probably a lot more valuable. Like, I've got a note in front of me here that just says API standards. It doesn't mean anything, but I had to get it out of my head.
think I'm still that child, by the way, just so you know. I got a thought in my head, I struggle if I can't get it out, and I must overspeak people at times, I'm sure of it. So I need to get better at that. This is turning into self-help, isn't it?
Definitely.
It's a bit, yeah. The testing therapists. So I'm curious to know any strategies you can think of to try and get the flow that you need to out of your, not just your day, but maybe kind of thinking more about your week. Do you find that it's easier to change tasks around so that you can have a bit of time, a chunk of time where you know this is your focus time, this is the time when you're getting stuff done, and then other bits, diffusion, is that right, Chris? Other times where it's okay to do that, or is it just something that will come and go? It's positioned by factors that are often beyond your control, and sometimes you just have to learn to accept that no one's ever going to get the amount of flow that they would ideally like. What do you think?
I think it depends, to borrow Chris's. It depends totally.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
It is totally. But the thing is, though, I think it depends on so many factors. It's, as you say, as we've sort of already discussed, it depends on the time of the day. It depends on the person. It depends on the task that you've been asked to do. It depends on the number of distractions that are likely to be around you and how well you can use tools or cut yourself off from those things. And I know that I've tried before, making silencing Teams so I don't get pinged. Some people have noise cancelling headphones or listen to the music that helps. And actually, I've tried that once or twice, and actually that does tend to help sometimes if you have a lot of distractions going on. I know that some people book themselves into meeting rooms to try and get that bit more silence rather than the open plan office. There are a lot of things you can try, and I found that sometimes what works one day doesn't actually necessarily work the next. If your brain is too busy, then listening to that music will just exacerbate that noise in your head. And so actually taking your headphones out and just concentrating on your work and accepting there is noise around actually can be more helpful than trying to cloud it out.
I was thinking about how I quite often will look at my calendar for the day or sort of over the upcoming week and try to plan the little slots when I might have availability to do things. But this thing happens sometimes, and it's a little bit like if you walk into the kitchen and there's just loads and loads of dishes and you're like, I've only got 10 minutes. And I really struggle to get involved and invested mentally in a big long-term task, one that takes a lot of setup when I know that I'm not even going to be able to make a dent on it in that small space of time. A week's calendar, to David's point, where it's just so busy, if you look at it and you go, I've got no time to work, and this goes back to habits and discipline, right? People say just throw some time into your calendar to ring fence yourself for that. But as sort of leaders and teammates and stuff, sometimes I don't want to make it that I'm unavailable for people to be able to ping me if it's important, if I don't want to be unblocked. And then I've got this weird sort of two parallel threads that are just fighting for my attention. And in the end, I sort of end up finding myself with a lot of this sort of diffuse mode stuff going on when I'm no longer at my desk. If I haven't had time to have time away from my desk during the day, like taking a walk or something, then maybe it's when I'm sat at the table with my kids at tea time, which is a terrible time to not be dealing with those things. But then what's also quite bad, and what has hampered me in the past as well, is if I've got things that have been playing in my mind and I haven't been able to resolve something in my head, then I'll wake up in the nighttime thinking about it. And then guess what? I can't get back to sleep. So it is a struggle. And I think you get into these good habits, like there's these sort of 100 days of code, 100 days of move and all these other cool things, and you do it and you've got a good habit, and you've got accountability with people if you're publishing your progress on stuff. That's a great thing to do, but you miss one day and you can lose everything. It's really hard, that discipline.
It's very hard to discipline, and I guess there's some of the things that make it hard is like stress, strain. We all can do things when there's less strain. We can all plan time when we've got capacity. It's when we don't have it, then obviously that we get pushed and strained. But it's often when flow and the like is more efficient to us and effective, that if we can be more efficient, then actually we get we'd have less strain, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it is hard to, I declutter my brain, I guess is the way I look at it. So if I've got 15 things on, it's hard to focus on one thing because there's 15 things. So that's where my to-do list come in and things like that. I just literally write things down. It's like, right, I'm going to get rid of one thing. If I can just do that, I've achieved something. But if I've just got lots of things floating in my head, I never start. So it's just like writing it down, hitting one thing on that list. I had 5 things on my list today, and I'm just having a look at it, got one of them done, half of the other one done, but the other 3 didn't get looked at. And I'm okay with that, because at least I achieved something. I got something off that list. That list didn't grow today, it shrank. I'll take that. That's a win for me. But it's about also saying no. It's about prioritizing things. It's creating that space. Like, my personal thing is I have like a half an hour in the morning. Well, I don't. Like, I have a meeting at 9:30 most days. I could try and do something in the half an hour before that and start at 9 o'clock. I'm not going to get productive. So I've changed my hours to a degree. I start at 9:30 and I work a bit later. And I can do that. I don't have family commitments. So I've adapted. I could start earlier, but I'm not really the early starter. But I find ways to fit around what I need to know how I could be productive. So I know I'm more productive in the afternoon, then that's great. I'll spend that extra time in the afternoon. So the problem with being an afternoon focused person is it builds up throughout the day. The pressure, if you see what I mean, that, I haven't done this yet, oh, I need some time. But it's either in the morning or in the evening, it's still the same thing. If your day consumes the rest of your afternoon from meetings and other things, at least, that can put pressure if you have to leave at 4. So I don't have that pressure, but that sometimes means I work a lot later than I should. Because once I get into a flow state, it's very hard for me to stop. So if I'm getting stuff done, I don't see a clock, don't have a clue what time it is. And it could be dark outside and I've got, terrible. But it is one of those things. It's about finding what works for you. Music really does help me. Gets rid of the little minor distractions. It doesn't get rid of all of them, but it just creates kind of a little bit of noise, a little bit of white noise that allows you to kind of slip out of the pings from tool here, pings from tool there. But yeah, there's lots of different techniques. I think that every individual kind of finds the ones that work for them. But there isn't a perfect solution, is there really? I think good enough, I think, is the aim.
Music is good though, right? Has you got anything in particular you listen to?
It'll depend on mood. So I quite like dance music sort of thing. So quite like sort of rhythm. But then I also quite like sort of panpipes and chilled out sort of Ibiza sunset music, I might call it, or Enya and things like that. So it just depends. I might like jazz. It just depends on how my brain is at the time. So sometimes that sort of coffee shop background music works. Sometimes it does the opposite, antagonizes. So it just depends.
And I would agree. The worst thing, I think, is songs that you recognize, because that really distracts you, as we discussed in our banter, that we might well end up singing along to it rather than actually doing some work.
I actually find certain types of songs, the ones that I want to sing along to are the ones I definitely cannot listen to whilst I'm focusing on things. But there are some songs that I don't feel the need to sing along to, that they're full of words and I do really like them, but I don't want to sing along to them, that I can listen to. I find if I've got music on, I can read better if it's the right kind of music than if I was in a completely silent room. I can't do complete silence very well. Sort of just need something just sort of like, quiet all those voices, so you can just then concentrate on taking in what you're reading. But yeah, I did try film scores and things like that, but I ended up started thinking about the films if they were too familiar, which wasn't very helpful, or they get a bit exciting at a certain point you really shouldn't do.
So I think then the kind of themes that I think everyone's kind of agreed on is that flow is good, but also realizing that you need to get away from flow and you can't be in constant flow is also quite healthy and necessary too. And everyone has different strategies for how they get in and out of it. Some work sometimes and some don't. If you're struggling with flow yourself, it's just be kind to yourself and experiment with different things and see what's out there and what will click with you one day. And just, I guess it's an ongoing thing, isn't it?
I'd also say that sometimes don't get too frustrated if you don't get the flow state that you were sort of half expecting. You might not be in the right state of mind or whatever, or other distractions. I came back from holiday a couple of weeks ago and I was looking forward to, I had a whole day planned to do a presentation or a workshop that I was working on. And the day came and the whole day was filled with catching up with people coming to my desk, just general stuff that I needed to be done because it was a higher priority, because I know that, because that had to be done by the end of the week rather than the workshop 2 weeks later. And so at the end of the day, I didn't feel that I'd actually produced anything, because what I'd planned in my flow state that I was really looking forward to, because there was a lot of work to do, didn't actually get achieved. I achieved a lot in helping other people, but I didn't achieve a lot in myself. But it hasn't really affected me. I know I still haven't done it, but I'm planning it again on Monday, and I've really dedicated a lot of time in order to get it sorted. And now it is becoming a priority because the workshop is now coming up. So, but I'm not putting myself under too much pressure to get into the flow state. I'm just putting myself under pressure to give myself the chance to do the work. And if I need a bit more time because I haven't quite got into that state, I'm going to give myself the sort of benefit of the doubt.
Grace is an important thing to give yourself sometimes, but as we've spoken about on previous episodes, sometimes we're our worst critic. We can sort of beat ourselves up on things. Or alternatively, to your point, David, sometimes there are things that are more pressing than what we want to do. It can be quite hard to sort of communicate and tell other people, bring people in on what works for you and what doesn't, because we've said everyone's different, but how do we actually tell our colleagues, the people that we work with, this is me, that these hours I'm going to put some boundaries on and only speak to me during these periods of time? Do we need to use tools? Do we have the ability to communicate those things with them and stuff about priorities and whatnot? It's a tricky one.
There's quite a lot of ways of dealing with that. So now we're less office-based, majority of us anyway. There is kind of like do not disturbs in Slack and things like that. There is kind of just turning off Slack. I hate to say this, but you can turn off these tools. Turn off, just because you're not on there doesn't mean you're not working. And most managers know this. So you can turn things off. You can put your computer on silent so you don't see things. You can do things offline, actually not on the computer. Shock horror, but you can print off a piece of paper, a document you have to read. I've got a 17-page report to read. Been trying to read it for a week. And reality is I'm just going to print it off now because I'll be able to read it without distractions more, because I struggle with that. So there's various different things. In the office, though, I did see people like putting little Post-it notes up on their desk and signs saying, if you see kind of a yellow Post-it on my monitor, that means do not disturb. Things like that. Doesn't work remotely so well, but you can kind of do that.
Yeah, I saw someone with a Pomodoro clock at their desk in one place I worked at, so you could see when they were actually in and out. There was quite a visual sort of thing.
I think that's what it is. It's about finding the things. But there's places, and I remember Simon talking about this, where you kind of almost say, this is my work pattern. This is how I work. So this is the time where I focus, this is the time where I don't. And that's great. And I'll get a lot of people give visibility. I get a lot of random people that I don't know putting meetings in my calendars. Can't really tell them so easily. And there's a lot of bad meeting etiquette going around. I don't know about every employer in every place, but I think part of ours is technology-based, where everything gets duplicated because we're in multiple systems. Consultants often is the case, where you've got a client place and you've got your own place. The meeting calendars don't sync. So managing calendars becomes an absolute nightmare. And I'm sure a few of you experienced that.
Yeah, so final word from me before we wrap up. I was going to say that I think that flow state is a really good thing to do if you can do it. And I get into a flow state when I actually edit this podcast. I love editing this podcast because I can just get in with it. I enjoy editing it, hearing what everyone says. So I will look forward to editing this particular episode on flow. So thank you very much for an engaging chat. Thank you very much, Beth, for stepping in and joining us again tonight. We are available for you to contact us via email at contactus@testingpeers.com. We're on the social media channels. We have LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and
Blue Sky.
That's it. And you can also help us on patreon.com. In all those things, look for Testing Peers. Thank you again for Safin QA, and thank you very much again for an engaging chat. And I hope you enjoyed listening. We enjoyed sharing it with you, and do come again next time. Thank you.
For now, it's goodbye from the testing peers.
Goodbye.